What if I told you that one of the greatest truths you'll ever face is also one of the coldest? The truth that no one really cares about you. Not in the way you wish. Not in the way you secretly expect when you walk into a room. When you post something online. When you're struggling through a quiet battle that no one else sees. At first, hearing that feels harsh, even cruel. It stings. We want to believe that others are paying attention, that our struggles and victories mean something to them. But Carl Jung believed that the moment you understand this truth deeply, not just in your mind but in your bones, life becomes simpler. The weight you've been carrying begins to lift. Because you stop living for everyone else's approval. You stop expecting others to give you what only you can give yourself. And isn't that liberating? Think about it. How much of your daily life is shaped by what other people might think? How often do you edit your words, your choices, even your dreams because you imagine someone somewhere is watching, judging, or keeping score? But here's the reality. They're not. People are too busy with their own struggles, their own fears, their own dreams to care about every move you make. And that's not a tragedy, it's freedom. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist whose work reshaped psychology, devoted much of his life to the idea of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not the mask you wear for others. He believed that the greatest obstacle to this journey was our obsession with external validation. We think we're living our own lives, but often we're just performing for an audience that isn't even paying attention. Jung's point was radical but simple. Once you accept that no one is as invested in your life as you are, you stop wasting energy trying to impress, trying to prove, trying to be seen. Instead, you begin to live more honestly, more freely, more fully. Now, this idea that no one cares hits hard because it confronts one of our deepest illusions. From childhood, we're trained to crave approval. We want our parents to be proud, our teachers to give us gold stars, our peers to accept us, society to applaud us. It feels like care, but most of the time it's conditional attention, not unconditional love. It's care that lasts only as long as you're performing the role someone else needs you to play. And when you step outside that role, when you stop pleasing, when you stop fitting neatly into expectations, you often find that the so-called care disappears. At first, that realization feels lonely. But Jung would argue that it's the first step toward authenticity. Because the moment you stop expecting people to carry your burdens for you, you discover that you are capable of carrying them yourself. And the moment you stop trying to live for their applause, you begin to hear a quieter, more important voice, your own. The ego hates this truth. It resists it with everything it has. The ego wants to be the center of the universe, the star of the show. It wants constant recognition, endless validation, proof that you matter. And of course you do matter, but not in the way the ego demands. You matter because of what you bring into the world, not because of who notices it. You matter because of how you live, not because of who applauds. So what happens when you finally accept that most people aren't paying attention? Life becomes simpler. Suddenly the pressure lifts. You don't need to fake interest in things you don't care about. You don't need to wear masks to win approval. You don't need to keep performing for an audience that was never watching closely anyway. You realize that your life is yours to live, not theirs to evaluate. And here's the irony. The less you expect others to care, the more authentic your relationships become. When you no longer cling to people for validation, you meet them with freedom. You're not trying to extract meaning from them. You're simply sharing your life. You're not desperate to be seen. You're content with being real. And strangely, that's when people actually begin to respect you more. Because nothing is more magnetic than someone who is truly at ease with themselves. Someone who doesn't beg for attention but radiates authenticity. Think of it like this. When you walk into a crowded room believing that everyone cares about how you look, how you speak, how you move, you shrink under the weight of imagined judgment. But when you walk into that same room knowing that people are mostly absorbed in their own lives, you're free. Free to speak honestly, free to act naturally, free to be yourself. Because you realize the spotlight you thought was blinding you was never really on you at all. Jung would remind us that embracing this truth isn't about becoming cold or detached. It's about becoming responsible. When you realize no one is going to live your life for you, you stop waiting, you stop postponing, you stop imagining that someday, someone else will arrive to care enough to make the choices for you, to give your life meaning for you. That day never comes, and that's the point. Meaning is your task, responsibility is your freedom. And in that way, no one cares becomes not a sentence of despair, but an invitation to strength. Because if no one cares enough to carry your weight, then you must carry it. If no one cares enough to build your dream, then you must build it. If no one cares enough to write your story, then you must write it. Life becomes simpler, not because it becomes easier, but because the illusions fall away. You see clearly, it's on you. It has always been on you. So the next time you feel overlooked, unappreciated, unnoticed, remember this. It's not that you don't matter. It's that people are wrapped in their own storms, just like you are. And that's okay, because once you stop demanding constant care from others, you make space to give it to yourself. And from that place of self-responsibility, you're able to connect with others, not out of neediness, but out of choice. That is where true connection begins, not in desperate dependence, but in mutual freedom. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And becoming who you are requires facing truths most people avoid. The truth that no one is watching as closely as you think. The truth that no one is going to save you. The truth that your life in all its struggle and beauty belongs to you and you alone. And once you accept that, fully without resistance, you discover a simplicity that is both terrifying and freeing. You are free from the chains of expectation, free from the hunger for endless validation, free to live your life as your own." So maybe the real question is this. Now that you know no one truly cares in the way you hope they did, how will you choose to live? Will you waste energy resenting it? Or will you take the gift of that freedom and finally begin to live, not for others but for yourself? When you first hear that no one cares about you, your instinct might be to resist it, to cling to the idea that surely someone must. You think about your family, your friends, maybe even your followers online. Surely they care, right? But if you look closely, you begin to see the difference between surface-level attention and deep, enduring care. And that's where the trap of expectations reveals itself. We expect people to notice, to appreciate, to validate us in ways they rarely can. And when they don't, we feel betrayed. We think something's wrong with us. But in truth, nothing is wrong. It's the expectation itself that's broken. From the time we're young, expectations are planted inside of us. We expect our parents to protect us, our teachers to encourage us, our friends to stand by us, society to reward us if we just play by the rules. These expectations give us comfort for a while, but as we grow, life shows us that they don't always hold. Parents are flawed, teachers get distracted, friends drift away, society doesn't always play fair. And that gap between what we expect and what we actually experience is the breeding ground for disappointment, resentment, and suffering. Jung would argue that part of growing into your true self means letting those expectations die. Not because people are bad, but because they are human. Imagine walking into a forest expecting every tree to lean toward you, to bend its branches to shade you, to drop its fruit into your hands. You would be disappointed almost instantly. But if you enter the forest with no expectation, simply to experience what is there, suddenly the trees are beautiful just as they are. The same is true for people. When you expect them to care about you in the way you want, you set yourself up for pain. But when you free yourself from that expectation, you're able to appreciate what they can give, however small or fleeting it may be, without demanding more than they have to offer. This doesn't mean you isolate yourself. It doesn't mean you become cynical or stop loving others. It means you shift from expectation to acceptance. You accept that people are wrapped in their own stories. You accept that care is not constant, that attention is temporary, that validation fades as quickly as it arrives. And in that acceptance you find peace. Because when you stop expecting everyone to notice your struggles, you begin to notice your own strength. But letting go of expectation is only half the journey. The other half is stepping into radical responsibility. Because once you accept that no one else is going to carry your weight, the responsibility falls on you, and that can feel terrifying at first. We are trained to look outside ourselves for answers, for direction, for someone to tell us what to do. It feels safer to believe that someone else is in charge, that someone else will step in if we fall. But when you strip away the illusion, you see the raw truth. Your life is your responsibility, no one else's. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires us to take back the projections we place on others. We project our hopes onto parents, lovers, leaders, even strangers, hoping they'll fulfill what we can't fulfill within ourselves. But the more we project, the more powerless we feel. Radical responsibility is about reclaiming that power. It's about saying no one else is going to live my life for me, so I will live it. No one else is going to heal my wounds for me, so I will face them. No one else is going to hand me purpose, so I will create it. The weight of that responsibility can feel crushing at first. It means you can't blame others anymore for your unhappiness. You can't sit around waiting for permission to begin. You can't keep telling yourself the story that your life will matter when someone else finally notices. You realize it has to matter to you here and now before anyone else does. And the paradox is that once you take that responsibility fully, life actually feels lighter, because instead of waiting for the world to care, you step into your own authority. You stop waiting for rescue care. You stop waiting for life to deliver you meaning, and you begin to generate it from within. Think about how many people waste years, even decades, paralyzed by expectation. They expect the right partner to complete them, the right job to validate them, the right audience to approve of them, and while they wait, life slips away. Radical responsibility cuts through that illusion. It says no one is coming to save you. The partner, the job, the audience, they can add to your life, but they cannot complete it. Only you can. That realization is both brutal and beautiful. It demands everything from you, but it also gives you everything in return. Jung often spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we try to deny or project onto others. Radical responsibility means turning toward that shadow instead of running from it. It means facing your own fears, your own weaknesses, your own failures, and saying, these are mine to work with. And when you take responsibility for your shadow, something miraculous happens. It stops controlling you. You no longer live in fear of being exposed because you've already faced it. You no longer need to project your flaws onto others because you've owned them. You stand taller, freer, more whole. Now let's pause and imagine what this shift looks like in everyday life. Think of someone chasing approval at work. They stay late not because they love the craft, but because they expect recognition. They bend over backward not because they believe in the mission, but because they expect praise. And when it doesn't come, they feel empty, bitter, resentful. But if that same person released the expectation of care and embraced responsibility, the story changes. They work not for applause, but for mastery. They push themselves not to be noticed, but to grow. And in that shift, life becomes simpler. Every effort is for themselves, not for the audience that may or may not clap. Or think about relationships. How many people enter relationships expecting the other person to heal their wounds, to make them whole, to constantly reassure them of their worth? Those relationships crumble under the weight of expectation. But when both partners step into responsibility, when they stop demanding constant care and instead bring their own wholeness to the table, suddenly the relationship becomes lighter, freer, more alive. Not a desperate transaction, but a conscious choice. This is the gift of Jung's wisdom. When you accept that no one cares as much as you think they do, you stop playing the exhausting game of performance. You stop living for expectations that will never be met. And when you embrace radical responsibility, you begin living with clarity and freedom. Your life belongs to you, not to the audience, not to the critics, not even to the people who love you most. It belongs to you and only you. And here's where the simplicity unfolds. Life is no longer about juggling endless performances, about keeping everyone else happy, about chasing approval like a dog chasing its tail. Life is about one question: what will you do with what is yours? That's it. The noise quiets, the weight of expectation dissolves. You stand alone, yes, but in that solitude you also stand in power. Carl Jung's insight reminds us that this truth is not meant to isolate us. It's meant to free us, because when you stop demanding others to care in ways they cannot, you make space for authentic connection. When you take responsibility for your life, you stop blaming and start creating. And in that space, life becomes not just simpler but richer. You no longer live as a character in someone else's story. You live as the author of your own. So ask yourself, what expectations have been quietly running your life? Whose care have you been chasing that may never come in the way you want? And are you ready to release those illusions? To embrace the raw responsibility of living your life as your own? If you are, you'll find that what once felt like loneliness transforms into liberation. And from that place, everything truly does become simpler. When the truth first hits you, that no one really cares in the way you want them to, it can feel like a heavy blow. But if you sit with it long enough, if you let it sink in, you begin to notice something unexpected. The very weight that once felt unbearable begins to dissolve, and in its place there is a quiet kind of freedom. This is where the transformation begins. Life stops being a stage where you constantly audition for others' approval, and it becomes a canvas where you finally paint with your own colors. The exhaustion of pretending, performing, and perfecting starts to fade, and in its place, authenticity rises. Authenticity is not about broadcasting every thought you have or forcing yourself to stand out. It's not about being loud or rebellious just to prove you're different. It's something quieter, deeper, more enduring. It's about alignment. The sense that your inner world and your outer actions finally match. You no longer smile just because someone expects it. You no longer say yes when your whole being screams no. You no longer live for applause, likes, or external validation. You live in tune with what is real for you. And here's the paradox. When you stop chasing care, when you stop bending yourself into shapes to be noticed, you actually become more magnetic. People can sense authenticity the way they can sense warmth on a cold day. It draws them in. But now their response doesn't define you. Their care, their attention, their recognition, it becomes a gift, not a need. You are no longer starving for it. And so when it comes, you can receive it without clinging to it. And when it fades, as it always does, you don't collapse. You remain whole. Think about how rare authenticity is in a world driven by appearances. Scroll through social media, and you'll see countless performances, smiles staged for the camera, captions designed for approval, lives curated for the gaze of others. Yet beneath it all, so many feel empty because they know the truth. It's all an act for people who don't actually care as deeply as they imagine. When you break free from that cycle, you no longer play the game. You post if you want, you share if you feel like it, but you're not chained to the reaction. Your sense of self isn't hanging on the thread of likes or comments. That detachment is rare, and rare is powerful. Jung's insight reveals that this authenticity is not just about behavior, it's about soul. When you stop needing the world to care, you finally meet yourself. You meet the parts of you that you've been hiding, suppressing, or reshaping just to be accepted. You meet the child within you, who was once desperate for approval. You meet the shadow that you've been running from. And instead of shoving them aside, you bring them into the light. This is where true wholeness begins. You may realize that for years you've been carrying a mask, the mask of the achiever, the pleaser, the strong one, the quiet one, the funny one, the mask that made others comfortable, the mask that got you approval. But masks are heavy, and after years of wearing them, your spirit starts to suffocate. The moment you set them down, even if it scares you, is the moment you finally breathe freely. This is what authenticity feels like. It's lighter, simpler, unburdened. But authenticity is not always easy. In fact, it's often uncomfortable, because the moment you stop pretending, you risk rejection. When you stop living to satisfy others, some people won't like it. Some may drift away. Some may criticize. And that's when Jung's truth becomes even more important. If no one truly cares in the way you once thought, then their rejection doesn't destroy you. You realize their approval was never the foundation of your worth. Your authenticity is not negotiable, not up for trade. You no longer dilute yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. And while that might cost you some shallow connections, it opens the door to deeper, truer ones. There's something else that happens once authenticity takes root. Simplicity. Life that once felt chaotic, cluttered with endless obligations and pressures, begins to quiet down. Why? Because most of that chaos was tied to expectation and performance. You said yes to things you didn't want to do because you wanted to be liked. You stayed in relationships that drained you because you feared being alone. You pursued paths that didn't inspire you because they seemed respectable. When you strip all that away, what remains is leaner, clearer. You no longer ask, what will they think? Instead, you ask, does this align with who I am? That single shift simplifies everything. Imagine a table covered with hundreds of puzzle pieces scattered everywhere. That's what life feels like when you live for others' care, messy, confusing, overwhelming. But when you live authentically, it's like sweeping away the extra pieces and focusing only on the few that matter. Suddenly the picture becomes clearer. The decisions feel lighter. The path feels simpler. And this simplicity does not mean smallness. It doesn't mean you stop striving, dreaming, or creating. It means that your striving is no longer desperate. Your dreams no longer borrowed, your creations no longer just for show. Everything comes from a place of inner alignment, and because of that, your energy flows more freely. You're no longer drained by the exhausting act of being someone you're not. You're no longer tangled in the constant battle to keep others happy. You're free to pour yourself into what actually matters to you. That's why people who embrace this truth often end up achieving more. Not because they're trying harder, but because they're finally unblocked. They're not wasting their lives chasing care that doesn't exist. They're building, creating, living. They're not afraid to take risks because they're not living for an imaginary audience anymore. Failure doesn't sting as much because they weren't performing to please others in the first place. Success tastes sweeter because it's not hollow. It's theirs. Now let's bring this back to you. Imagine what would happen if starting today, you stopped expecting anyone else to care in the way you want. Imagine if you released that weight from your shoulders and stood fully in responsibility for your own life. Imagine if you began peeling back the masks, even just one at a time, and allowed your real self to step forward. Imagine the simplicity, the clarity, the freedom. It would feel terrifying at first, like standing on the edge of a cliff without a hand to hold. But then you'd realize you can fly. Because here's the final paradox. When you stop depending on others to care, you actually begin to connect with them in a truer way. No longer desperate for approval. You're able to give freely, to love without condition, to share without fear. You're no longer performing, you're relating, and the people who resonate with your authenticity, they stay, not because they have to, not because you manipulated them into caring, but because they see you as you are. That kind of connection is rare. That kind of connection lasts. So when Carl Jung tells us that no one cares about you, he's not trying to leave you in despair. He's trying to show you the doorway to freedom. The moment you stop waiting for others to validate your existence is the moment you step into your true self. And from there, life becomes radically simpler, profoundly richer, and infinitely more real. In the end, it's not about being uncared for. It's about being uncaged. It's about dropping the illusions that weigh you down and stepping into the truth that sets you free. The truth that your worth isn't measured by how much others care, but by how fully you live in alignment with who you are. And once you taste that freedom, there's no going back, because the world may not care as much as you want it to, but that doesn't matter anymore. You care, and that is enough.